Welcome to Why Media. This is going to be our second interview as a retrospective to one of the reviews that I just did. I have a professional here who's going to help me talk about the movie Gothika. Law, if you could introduce yourself and give kind of your background and why you are more experienced in this field, and I want you to talk about it instead of some jackass on the internet like me.
I'm also a jackass on the internet, but there are a few more things that I do. I'm a therapist, a psychotherapist, which is it's a fancy term to say that I do therapy for mental health. I think that's the reason why you want to talk to me about this movie. I mean, it makes sense.
It's the only reason I've ever wanted to talk to you.
I thought so. I had a feeling about that.
Little did you know, like 12 years ago when you added me on Facebook, this was the plan the whole time.
Wow, that's long game for you. That's what we.
Yeah. Okay, could you, so the movie that we're reviewing is Gothica, and it has a lot to do with psychology and psychiatry as a profession
Yes.
and kind of the criminal justice aspect of these two fields. What is your background in respect to those specifically?
Yeah. Well, I actually got my start in mental health by doing advocacy work and programming and grant writing for people who were involved in the criminal justice system or are probably still involved a decade later because that's just the way it is. And then I moved on, went to grad school. My undergraduate was in psych and sociology and all of that, and I went on to grad school to become a therapist. So I have a little bit of both worlds of experience working with folks who are incarcerated and also just mental health in general.
So I figure what I'll do is I'll give a synopsis of the movie, a brief synopsis. If you want a full synopsis, you can check out my review, which is up now. I don't really understand why you would be watching this if you hadn't watched the review previously, but that's the internet, I don't know. This could be what YouTube suggested, and it didn't suggest the other video, which is more content, which is weird. Um, okay, so Gothica is a 2003 movie starring Halle Berry as Dr. Miranda Gray. She is a psychiatrist at a penitentiary slash psych ward, I guess. She's considered very competent at her job, despite some ethical issues and some, like, kind of interpersonal issues that she just can't overcome, which we'll discuss shortly. But she's considered very competent at her job. She's respected by all of her peers and all that, and she's considered to be brilliant by most people.
Mm.
And one night, she gets into an accident trying to avoid hitting someone in the middle of the road, and she kind of passes out. She actually ends up in her psych ward in particular, the one that she worked at in the area. She goes about trying to figure out and piece together what happened, why she was put there, and as it turns out, her husband was killed, and everyone is presuming that she did it. So the movie is kind of dealing with grappling with that. As the movie unfolds, we find out that there is a ghost involved that turns out to be the girl that she almost hit in the middle of the road, because classic horror movie tropes, you gotta do them. The ghost, as it turns out, basically possessed her in order to avenge her own murder. It turns out that her husband, Dr. Douglas Gray, who is also working at the penitentiary as the head doctor guy, there's a term for that, and I don't know what it is. The head doctor guy, he turns out to be a serial rapist and murderer. And the end of the movie is that we figure out that he had a partner after, we discover all of his crimes and such. We discover his partner, who is his best friend, Sheriff Bob Ryan. If you want a full synopsis, you can go back to the other video. It'll be linked in the description, and there's going to be a card somewhere, wherever YouTube puts those. And I think they're up there. And yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask La here about a couple of the aspects of this, because this movie is kind of fascinating to me in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, The first question I would like to ask is the movie opens with an interview between Dr. Miranda Gray, not to be confused with Dr. Douglas Gray, because this movie has to have too many fucking doctors. The movie opens with Dr. Miranda Gray interviewing a patient named Chloe. Dr. Gray seems kind of dismissive of Chloe's experiences in a lot of way. Chloe was a victim of sexual assault, and now she's claiming to be raped repeatedly by the devil in her cell. I wanted to kind of get your opinion on that and your kind of foray into what how Miranda handles this and how that reflects reality and how that reflects what should be done.
Yeah. Um, so, what an opening for a movie. And unfortunately, right, I feel like the portrayal of Miranda's character was extremely realistic. I say unfortunately because just therapist and person, human me, um, felt that it was uh, she was not conducting the interview in a way that was really conducive to helping her patient. I say that it's realistic because often the power dynamic in those situations is really static for some folks. Like they will be in the room knowing that they have the power, feeling like they have everything already figured out before they even ask the questions, right? It's kind of presented that this client already has, I would say, a relationship, but it's probably history with Dr. Miranda, and it's not positive, right? It seems like the client is not being believed, and it called into mind like why was Miranda called to meet with her? It's probably because there was some sort of prison disturbance or safety concern for Chloe. And I feel like that a lot of these sort of like incarcerating entities aren't necessarily concerned with the individuals, right? They're concerned with the individual's compliance. So it seems like Miranda was just there to get some evidence to kind of make notes and cover asses to say, yes, this person is delusional and continue business as normal.
So, speaking of Chloe's delusions,
Mm-hmm.
Chloe interprets everything under a religious light and Miranda is an atheist who does not believe in any of that, and she ends up being pretty dismissive of Chloe's claim that she's being raped by the devil. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that really bugged me because I think that if there is any chance that someone is being sexually assaulted, and this seems to be it seems like it's not just a woman's prison or a woman's psych ward. It seems to be like a mixed sex psych ward, and the two are cordoned off, but there still seems to be like a significant chance of assault. I feel like any claim, even a supernatural claim, should be investigated. What are your opinions on, I guess, the delusional nature of Chloe's claim and how one should go about investigating that?
Yeah, I agree with you. Any sort of claim by a client, a human, is you need to investigate it, right? The main idea is not to be dismissive of what a client is going through. They may be using any sort of analogy or something that makes sense to them, but it doesn't mean that it should be dismissed, right? No one's personal beliefs or lack of belief should really be influencing how they're interacting with the clients. That's really important. In fact, it's really important to know the belief system of the client and how how their worldview is formed to better understand what they're talking about. And I feel that Miranda was doing the direct opposite of that, right? Like, there isn't this, that doesn't exist. You're just talking about this previous experience that you had. Let me just dismiss you and invalidate you a little bit more. Absolutely should have been investigated.
So one of the things that happens after we interview Chloe and we kind of go about the dismissal process of Chloe's
Hmm.
experience, like I said, Miranda eventually ends up in much the same place as Chloe in the psych ward, and that raised huge ethical issues for me because she was institutionalized for what seems like at least a couple of weeks in the
Hmm.
place where she used to work, and her primary care person is a colleague that she worked with regularly. To me, that seems like a huge conflict of interest.
Yeah, it is. That's because it is. That's why it seems that way. Yes, that's a no go. The only yeah. Yes, if the movie was kind of indicated that she was out for a while is sketchy. The only way that I can see that her being transported back to that particular holding place is that if they're in a really small county and there just really isn't anything for a while and they need to keep her sort of locked up and isolated somewhere and monitored somewhere. But it would be like overnight, and then she would be shipped out to the next county or wherever else would have the appropriate facility for her level of care and her needs. So, really wouldn't have happened. Just a lot of ethical problems with that. A lot of ethical problems with that one.
One of the things that happens in the movie is Chloe is attacked repeatedly by the ghost, and the ghost is not a nice person, especially in the showers. I want to ask about the showers because to me, as a combination psych ward prison, I guess that's a question I wanted to ask. It seemed really weird to me that there was this communal psych ward prison, and I know that some areas are just like that, where they don't have two separate facilities; it's a combined facility. What
Mm.
is your experience with that? Because to me, I didn't realize it was a prison. I thought it was just a psych ward until basically the shower scene.
They do exist in that way because, so in the criminal justice system, everything is separated out according to like level of like the risk. And then so you would have, generally in some places, you might have a psych ward wing where people who need a particular level of care or services or staff or however they might want to phrase that would be in that area, kind of sequestered off. Or they might have a separate facility that's basically a mental health ward, or for someone who has been involved in some sort of illegal thing, right? High stakes, usually, like, murder or anything where the public safety would be threatened. So these kind of facilities absolutely do exist.
So one of the concerns that I would have as a patient there is when the shower scene in particular bugged me because like there's this visual motif throughout the movie about how people who have a lot of trauma like Chloe and like later Miranda see a
Mm-hmm.
distorted version of themselves, and I
Mm-hmm.
imagine that having it's like 20 to 30 women in that room. I
All
can't
huddled up together.
Yeah, all huddled up together. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have body self esteem issues, at least a little
Mm-hmm.
bit here. And, like, if you asked me to get into a shower with 30 other people, I would be remarkably uncomfortable. Someone
Mm-hmm.
who is, one, being sexually assaulted either in the past, as Miranda believed Chloe was, or currently, like, that just seems. What are your thoughts on the shower aspect of it, and from both a professional and or a personal view, because it would scare the heck out
Yeah.
of me.
Well, absolutely. Like, well, clearly we're, talking about this movie where this is just a good, encasing of bodies that are, different shaped and, many of them are like, I don't know, like, I don't know. It's kind of like this shroud of mystery and uncomfortableness. That's maybe a good movie device.
Yeah.
Uh, as far as something that would help the quality of people's life who have experienced trauma, who are just people, like maybe even not even people that have experienced trauma. Like privacy is kind of one of those basic human dignity right that
Yeah,
is
things.
often, yeah, it's often stripped away in those kind of incarcerated settings with the justification that, like, well, you gave up your rights when you decided to do the naughty thing that you did. So it might also be a nod to that, that these people are not even seen as people, but just sort of like cattle hoarded into a shower machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The patients do certainly seem dehumanized in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the like the cells look super cinematic in the movie. I noticed,
Mm-hmm.
like they're just these glass walls with like an internal look, and like there's a backlight instead of an
Mm-hmm.
overhead light. Like for the purposes of a movie, it looks excellent, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think that like someone who's going through any kind of psych problems would be very comfortable in such an open glass box and being peered upon. But I guess, thinking about it, we do this with prisons with just plain bars and such,
Mm-hmm.
and no one has any privacy, and you just kind of have to get over it. Which, like, we you've mentioned this at a couple of points at this point. That we do kind of dehumanize prisoners and I guess psych patients as well to a remarkable
Mm-hmm.
degree. Anyway, the shower scene also has one other element that I thought was concerning. The ghost attacks Miranda and carves in her arm, not alone,
Mm-hmm.
and the staff just assumes that Miranda is harming herself, despite the fact that they can't follow or find, despite the fact that they can't find any weapons at the
Mm-hmm.
scene. They just found her in pain, and all of the other women ran away, scared out of their gourds, because I mean that would be pretty fucking scary, honestly. How would you approach that as a professional, where you could not find a weapon or definitive proof that someone was hurting themselves, but
Mm-hmm.
like I guess that has to be the implicit assumption since we don't know that ghosts exist.
Sure. I think my first assumption would be, well, beyond my first assumption, I'm going back to that previous conversation about investigating everything. Like, this is a safety risk, and even if the facilities aren't really concerned about the individual prisoners, like, they definitely would be concerned about keeping up the face value of, like, this is a law and order tight ship kind of facility. This is how we get our funding, this is how we hold our respect. So figuring out, like, what's going on and removing whatever that threat is would make a lot of sense. But from, an individual provider, if I worked in a prison, or if I, somehow was involved with that incident, we would be looking at everything, right? Going through what the story was, talking to people who had, also had been there to figure out what was going on and what was the risk. It would be really troubling to not be able to find out what was used, right? Especially because everyone was in there, not like they had a chiv in their pocket, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be something that would need to be investigated more. And it felt like, again, they were just readily there to dismiss and say, oh, well, we solved the answer really quickly. It was you. You did it. You're crazy. Close case.
The theme of the movie that I focused on, and there are a couple that I could have focused on, but this is the most interesting to me. It's something that you don't really get to see in the movies. Chloe, at the beginning of the movie, says that you can't trust someone who thinks that you're crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
Miranda later comes around to this line of thinking. She kind of dismisses it offhand during her first interview, but as her ex colleagues, ex peers, or what have you, dismiss her, she realizes that Chloe kind of had a point. What are your
Yes.
opinions on that aspect of it?
Oh, 100% agree. When you are developing a therapeutic relationship or a therapeutic alliance with someone, the most important thing is that that person feels like they're going to be heard and understood. And it's not even an issue about believing, right? Like, if someone was communicating something to me that felt, outlandish by my worldview, um, they still need to feel like I'm understanding what they're saying. I need to repeat it back to them in their language. I need to make them basically feel like they're safe. And no sort of improvement of an individual's quality of life, which would really should be the goal of any sort of therapy or any sort of rehabilitative program. We should be figuring out how to help them get better, but there's none of that can exist without feeling like they can trust the person who they're talking to. And anyone could relate to that, right? Like if you were sitting across from someone and telling them about something that was really important to you and they were dismissing you, you're not going to keep telling them more generally, right?
One of the things, and I don't want to project here, I have several strong opinions about the way that our justice system is structured,
Mm-hmm.
especially with respect to, rehabilitation versus kind of punitive justice. I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you had any strong opinions, and I am totally, totally goading this because I want to choose a choice to be the ACAB guy on YouTube. Not that there aren't enough of us.
I have a lot of strong opinions, and maybe they're even beyond opinions at this point because of the long history that I've had working in the, not in, with people involved in the criminal justice system. I'm still trying to separate myself from that. It's like experience at this point, like observations. I have very strong observations about how mental health is handled in general and how that really affects the population of people who are incarcerated. It's a disproportionate number of folks who are incarcerated have mental health concerns. And we know factually know that jail and any other kind of incarceration does not improve mental health. We know factually that it deteriorates mental health. And yet, mental health, for example, like prisons and jails in general, are the largest mental health facilities that exist in America, and they're mental health facilities because there's nowhere else for these folks to go. And again, because the three main reasons that people are incarcerated is a public safety issue. Are they going to be a danger to themselves? Like a flight risk, right? If they're going to run away and not get the justice that they deserve. So we will incarcerate people. And flight risk can mean homelessness, right? You have nowhere to go, so we don't know how to find you. There are a lot of reasons why the mental health population in prisons is really high. And then not only that, but we also know factually that mental health conditions can deteriorate and become worse and be exacerbated by these places that don't really care about the quality of their life. So it's fucked up. I mean, that's the bullet point is boom, fucked up. That's all I had to say, really. That was
Yeah.
just too many words to be like, it ain't good.
I just want to reiterate there are other systems that we could potentially be using. Norway has a system that is a little less punitive. They give people like full apartments as opposed to
Yep.
cells and stuff like that. There are other options as opposed to this very harsh, very punitive system where we feel the need to punish people for their mental health as opposed to try and help them. Granted, a lot of
Yes.
those.
And as another little aside, that those options would be significantly cheaper than what we're doing currently. For example, in the small county that I live in, it takes, wow, and it's been a while even since I've done like the stats and reports and things like this, but 7 years ago, so this number probably is up, per night in a small county jail, I think it was like 120, $150 per night per inmate, which is, if you think about just paying someone's rent, it's going to be less than $700 a month, $800 a month. With that much money a month, you would be able to help someone make sure that they're fed, that they're getting services, that they have a roof over their head. You would even be able to pay for some sort of like case manager to help them be able to figure out all their shit and get the services that they need. All of that would be possible if we just 86.
Yeah. But
Yes.
at least in America, there seems to be kind of this attitude that, if you do something wrong, if you do something that's untoward, you deserve to be in misery, you deserve to be miserable,
Right.
which is a very weird thing to me. Like, I don't know. We've all made mistakes. I, as someone who regularly speeds, not that I'm admitting that, uh, I break the law basically every time I drive in one way or another. I'm not always respectful. I do the California roll when I come to stop signs, and for some people that's enough to get them in prison or worse, especially with the current you know stuff that happens. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so all of that is great, and I do really appreciate your opinion on that. So I want to talk about the infantilization. In addition to the
Yes.
not trusting, I feel like everyone at the hospital, the nurses that Miranda used to work with every day, the Dr. Graham, played by the
Mm-hmm.
lovely Robert Downey Jr., uh,
Mm-hmm.
all of these people treat Miranda like she's made of glass at first and completely incapable. I'm honestly kind of surprised we didn't have any of them trying to spoon feed her porridge at some point. What are your opinions on how we kind of baby and infantilize the mentally ill?
It's an interesting like dynamic too because we both infantilize them and then over like demonize them as well. Like you're unfit, you're not good, you're a bad one, and you need to be subdued, right? Um, and you're also incapable and fragile and all of those other things that you just mentioned. But one of the huge themes that I really appreciated, maybe that's the right word, about this movie is the power dynamic and how easily that can shift because Miranda became was this like stoic, like I'm gorgeous and I'm married to the boss, and well that's another issue, but whatever. I'm married to the boss, and everyone respects me and I can swim laps, and all of it. I'm Halle Berry, all of these things.
If we had the choice,
um
we would all be Halle Berry.
yes, obviously. But you really see that shift when she becomes the accused, right? Like all of that power dynamic that she had, all of that flawlessness that she had was just stripped from her immediately, and they immediately took on the role opposite of respecting her to not respecting her, not to believing her at all.
Yeah, no, it is quite the transition, and I thought that it happened kind of quickly in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Like, because again, I don't think that she's there for like a huge amount of time. To me, it seems in the grand scheme of the movie, probably like maybe a week or two, where she
Sure.
transitions from like being in those weird glass cells, and then when she supposedly cuts herself, she's put in like a higher security one, and
Mm-hmm.
like one, this prison sucks ass. I gotta say, like if the goal,
Well, yes.
yeah, if the goal is to keep people inside, like apparently it's real fucking easy to get around. One of the things that happens about halfway through the movie or so is Miranda asks the ghost to help her out, help her escape, so that she can figure out what the fuck is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the ghost kindly agrees to that, which is
Sure.
very kind of the ghost managing to.
Right, Casper?
Yeah, Casper opens the fucking door, which is cool, I guess. And like within 10 minutes of looking, basically, like it's probably like a little bit longer in movie time, but like on screen time, it's like 2 minutes. She
Mm.
discovers definitive proof that Chloe is being molested in her, not not only in her cell, but Chloe at this point has been put in maximum security because
Mhm.
she's supposedly a danger to herself and others, right?
Sure.
So like, and Miranda tries to get people to look into this, and like there, I would imagine there would be records, but again, no one chooses to investigate this, and that's just super.
Hmm.
It was one of the things that I found really infuriating. Is you would think that the that they would, at least take this theoretically competent person at least at one point, because now they think that she's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Um,
Hmm.
and granted, who isn't? But that face, you hate Cocoa Puffs.
Well, I'm not really a huge fan of artificial chocolate, but
But no, still, like we managed to find definitive proof in like 2 seconds, and no one takes it seriously even still. Um, so
yeah. And mhm.
with that said, though, I want to talk about the prison itself because I don't have any experience in prison because I'm kind of boring. That, like I said, the crimes that I commit are speeding and the California roll.
Mhm.
Not likely to. I'll get a ticket and that'll be expensive, but that's roughly the extent of it.
Mm.
And it's not terribly often that that happens either. Uh, but the prison is like the prison is bad in like the way that it's designed because apparently ghosts have access to like everything. Um,
Yes.
but also it's just I know it's a horror movie and I know it's supposed to be spooky,
Mm.
but all of the all of the lighting in the prison is so cold. Everything is very blue,
Mhm.
which is impersonal, and it's very clinical and very clean
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. Until
Mhm.
we discover that it's kind of run down. It has constant power issues where the
Mhm.
lights are going out or the lights are flickering, and not just because ghosts do that, but also just because it has a shitty power grid, I guess. Uh,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, how do you think that might affect someone who is experiencing mental illness or experiencing hallucinations?
Yeah, that our environments directly affect our mental health, right? And that can mean sort of like the social environment, but like our actual living environments. People, if we think about it in this really common terms about, how your house is organized or not organized and how you feel when you're sitting in the middle of a mess rather than how you feel when everything is, at least organized to your liking, right? Like, how do you feel when you walk into a nice business or you walk into a place where there's rats going across? Like, it really affects how we feel, right? And then we're thinking about this enough. If we're in an environment that's not great all the time, like there's no escaping from it, I immediately thought of, when you're talking about the flickering lights, like how that's a sensory concern,
Yeah.
how that would induce anxiety, how that would induce overstimulation, how it may induce migraines and headaches, which obviously that's going to affect people's mood and energy levels. They may be hypervigilant, all of that, right? Things that we don't want to be happening in any situation, especially if it's not something you can just be like, oh my gosh, those buzzing lights at work, I can go home and recover from it. These folks have no time to recover from that environment, and it would not be conducive to improving the quality of your life in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the bottom
Mm.
line is don't go to this penitentiary for any reason. Don't go to Arkham
Yes.
Asylum, which has spooky fucking gargoyles in addition to shitty lighting. It's one of those things that's always annoyed me about Arkham Asylum. It's a spooky gothic Victorian mansion that was
Yes.
converted into that, and like
Hmm.
that's not. No wonder why everyone is like. I can't blame anyone for escaping from that hellhole. Like it's
Right.
obviously not going to help you. It even drove the psychiatrist insane. Harley Quinzel
Right.
became Harley Quinn in part because she worked in that hellhole, and the environment's just kind of conducive to that.
Hmm.
Um, with
But
that said,
it's a place to throw the undesirables, so everybody loves it. You just throw them away. You don't have to think about it. They're not out until they do get out. But then you can always just throw them away again. It's a perfect system. What are you talking about?
a perfect system. It definitively makes sure that we have more Batman comics, and I think that's the important thing.
You had a good point there.
With that said, though, I guess let me see. Do I have any other like remarkably good questions so far? Not that any of these have been remarkably good, but they've been food for thought at very least. Um,
Yes.
I guess we should discuss the overall like meta plot because like the first, in my opinion, the movie comes in kind of two halves. The
Yeah, I
first,
agree.
yeah, the first half is really highly focused on kind of Miranda's treatment as a person and how
Hmm.
the psychology and psychiatry departments of her friends just kind of throw her away in much the way that one would be in Arkham Asylum.
Hmm.
The second half of the movie is a lot more supernatural. We're focusing much more on the ghost mystery and discovering all of the secrets with Douglas being
Hmm.
what he becomes, or sorry, what he always was. So one, that's kind of an interesting question, I guess. Like, whenever there's interviews of like the family and friends of a serial killer after we come out,
Hmm.
there's always the classic, "Oh, I would have never guessed that he was a serial killer. He seemed like such
Right.
a nice boy." But like, do you think that Miranda should have been maybe not more aware, or like she has training, she deals with potentially very dangerous psychologically disturbed people. Do you think
Mm.
like I'm not going to go ahead and blame her that she didn't see this because it sounds like Douglas was a very competent serial murderer.
Mm.
But like, do you think that there might have been an inkling that she knew or anything like that as far as Douglas goes?
I don't know. Well, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that beginning scene where you find out that they're all right. These two folks are lovers, and then he's standing behind her with like this sort of authority and like take this glass and like throw it on the mirror and like without a thought, like she didn't give him a face. It was just like immediate obedience. Oh, a glass of water, we'll throw it on the mirror. This seems you know fine. I don't know if that was a normal response, but it sounds like, and who knows how they met. I don't know if she was working there and they met through that situation and he kind of groomed her and built her up to be who she is. It kind of had that feeling with, in that scene where he's just standing over her and it's that mirror scene. And I'm wondering if he used that power that he had really to control her, right? And to really influence her in that way. Because, he even in the beginning, like this is what is that plot thing where we say something and then it's a reveal later? What is that? My brain is off. What's that called?
Foreshadowing?
There you go, foreshadowing. So we had the foreshadowing bit where it's, you know,
Yeah.
and who are you in this situation, blah blah blah, and who am I? Well, I'm God. So they really establish that they have that kind of
Dynamic.
relationship, that she just accepts it, like, oh wow, I'm just sort of lucky to be in the presence. And it also comes up in later on where he's leaving off to go to his murder zone, and he asks Robert Down or tells Robert Downey Jr. to his character to look after Miranda and like follow her partway home. So there's really that dynamic set up in the beginning to really makes me think that maybe she was groomed and swept in the direction that they were. So even if she did, maybe I don't know. Yeah, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I don't know.
I didn't really actually consider because like every other framing when Gray is not around, even when it's just her and Dr. Graham, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, like
Yeah.
she seems before she's in the hospital as a patient, she seems in control. And I didn't really consider the fact that when she's with Douglas, she does kind of have a more submissive role. I didn't I
Yes.
didn't think about that from a writing perspective. So it's
Hmm.
yeah. And again, I wasn't saying necessarily that that was a plot hole or anything. I think it's very reasonable for someone not to realize that one of their most trusted people is a serial killer who would,
Right. Yeah.
unless
We,
there's
we, we
something
kind of see what we want to see, and especially like people really love that illusion and the sort of picturesque life that they had seemed really important to keep, which is probably why Casper the Friendly Ghost was like, I really need to like fuck this up a lot. Like you really need to be shaken up a lot for you to understand what was happening and help me solve my crime.
yeah. There's another theme that goes through the movie now that I'm thinking back to it. When Miranda is talking to Gray about Chloe's, or Douglas, about Chloe's treatment, she wants to take Chloe off all of her meds, because she thinks that the meds are dulling her in some way and making her
Mm,
process things incorrectly. And then
mm,
later in the movie, we find out that the ghost,
mm.
Jill, tried to contact her father, who also works at the hospital as, uh, I guess, an administrator or something. I'm not sure.
Sure.
Through dreams and much like the same kind of visions that Miranda has of her being
Mhm.
or inflamed or whatever. Uh, what do you think about? And he took medication in order to dull those and make those go away. So there's a kind of implicit argument in the movie that maybe medication isn't the right answer. I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that being maybe a point in there. And I will say that psychiatry has and does help a lot of people. The difficult part is it's that it's not, it's very rarely like the first time you go to, see a psychiatrist or a general practitioner who can, or a nurse practitioner who can prescribe medications for you. It's like, here, try this out. Let's see what happens with this. And often, because of the power differential and the power dynamic, people like just stick with that first thing, even if it's not really helping them, or they feel like they can't go back and say, hey, this isn't working because this is a doctor who's supposed to know, like, this isn't working, right? So that's why there's so much difficulty. And on the other end of that, like psychiatric medication has been used to, again, crowd control, to manage, to dumb down, to make you compliant. So clearly, there's a spectrum of experiences with this. And absolutely, some medication really makes people not feel like themselves, makes them feel zombified, or makes them feel sleepy, or makes them feel high in a way that they don't enjoy. So I can understand why that message might be there. I would hate to write off psychiatry totally as a practice, but there's definitely some issues that happens with it. Not to mention the disparities, and some people aren't really given the opportunity to take the right doses of medication. But it's that's a whole different story.
Yeah, I just kind of I was thinking about that, and there's also this is not exactly related to the movie, but I remember a
Mhm.
reading about uh, Kanye West's creative process, and apparently
Mhm.
Kanye was diagnosed as bipolar at some point, which
Yes,
makes a lot of sense if you follow his Twitter. Um,
sure.
and when he's trying to write an album or whatever, record it, do an art, when he's trying to do an art,
Hmm.
he stops taking his medication because he feels that it inhibits him in some way. Which,
Hmm.
granted, I don't know how accurate that would be, but it
Sure.
is like it as someone who's been on a slew of antidepressants, none of which seem to work because I'm complicated. Um, I kind of get it. Like medication can make you feel like shit a lot of the time,
Mhm.
so I understand that. I also don't want to dismiss it offhand either because, like you said, it does have value and it is a good idea in some ways. Um,
Yes.
it's just the fact that a movie that is kind of focused, at least for the first 45, 50 minutes or so of the movie, on psychiatry and psychology, having that
Hmm.
recurring message, I thought was a little interesting. I guess the last thing, because I'm pretty sure we've covered all of the main questions. I guess the
Sure.
last thing is this is YouTube. We have to give everything like ratings, right? That's how
Mhm.
YouTube works. So I'd like to get two ratings from you. One, your rating as kind of a professional. What did you think of the
Mhm.
psychology of the movie? Did you think that it made consistical? The fuck does consistical mean?
Consistent.
Consistent logical sense. And the second rating is what did you think of it as a person? Because you're not just your job, probably. I don't know. You might be a
Probably.
person.
Jury's out on that one. As a therapist, and as someone who has, done the things that I've previously talked about, I liked the movie. Um, you know, the statements that it was trying to make, at least from my, the way that I extracted them, the way that I interpreted them, I think that it was really highlighting a lot of things that aren't often talked about, like the or aren't talked about enough. I talk about them all the time. People are always hearing me talk about power dynamics and things like that. But it really highlighted the idea of by dynamics with this plot device of like, what if like the tables were turned? Like, what would happen? So,
Marvel's What If with Halle Berry.
yes, exactly. It's hard though, totally to say what I think about it as far as like the the psychopathy of it, because it's about mental health, but it's not. It's not congruent in that way where we really find out that Miranda's character wasn't,
Well, yeah, because it's
like,
like,
the ghosts aren't real, and that, this really was in her head, and this was a psychotic break, and she did actually kill her husband, and she did like know about it. She found out about it somehow, and she's using this as a tool to kind of process through her trauma. Like, I feel like a movie that was made a little later would have gone that route, about like, oh, this is how somebody processes their trauma, and it's not really ghosts, or is it? But the movie was pretty clear. I think it tried to be pretty clear that like, actually, yes, like, traumatized Casper the Friendly Ghost came out and said, please help me solve this, or not help me solve the murder, but let me resolve this murder for you, and let me use your body to do so.
yeah. No, it's definitely like a full yeah, and apparently at the end of the movie, even because you're right, I think that the movie would have played it both ways if it'd been made a little bit later. Is it supernatural? Is she just cracked or whatever? But
Mm-hmm.
I think that because the movie, at the end of the movie, we find out that Rachel is not the only ghost that she sees. She sees
Right.
another little boy ghost who's a missing child, apparently, and
Mm-hmm.
like that's why I make the joke at the end of my review about her just becoming part of the mystery gang and going around and solving mysteries with the dog and being genuinely better than Jennifer Love Hewitt in Ghost Whisperer, because fuck that show. It's a terrible fucking show. It is kind of interesting, and I think that the movie's pretty optimistic about that. I think that the movie wants to state that ghosts do, in fact, exist to
Mm-hmm.
one degree or another, and they're not a metaphor like in Crimson Peaks, where they are quite literally a
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah, but I don't know. That kind of messes with my head a little bit, and it's not something that I dislike about the movie. Because I feel like they're saying so many strong things about mental health, all the things that we've talked about and commented on already. But like, it makes me question, like, are they saying that like people don't have mental health concerns, and it is just ghosts, and we should always just, I don't know,
I
did it
mean,
have a message of just like, believe people because shit happens and ghosts are real? I don't know what the overall message was with that particular ending.
I especially think that it's a little like that aspect of it is a bit muddled, especially with Chloe's character, because we
Mm-hmm.
do find out that one, she is actually being molested or raped or whatever
Yes.
term you want in the hospital, but we find out that it's not the devil doing it, right? And presumably, if
Yes.
ghosts exist, the devil could also potentially exist.
True.
Um, but we do find out that it's a very tangible, a very real person doing this who happens to have the anima sola, the plot device tattoo,
Right.
tattooed on his chest. I do think that that's one of the aspects that really kind of fucks up because Chloe at the end of the movie is released. Like she's just,
Mm-hmm.
despite the fact that she murdered her stepfather, despite the fact that like she was perceived as a danger to herself and others in the hospital,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I don't really like like despite all of our chest beating or what have you about how we could reform the justice system and reform the mental health systems,
Sure.
there are some people who can't be integrated into society, right? I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement. In that, like, if you consistently try and harm people, like if you are a serial killer, for instance, like
Mm-hmm.
Douglas probably shouldn't be around people who he would like to murder.
Mm-hmm.
I like that's always the counter argument from people a little more right than us, or at least more
Mm.
right than me. I don't want to speak to your political things on public. Um, we can do that privately. But the first thing when people say a prison abolition or whatever is, oh,
Mhm.
but what about murderers? Well, obviously we don't want murderers to be reintegrated into society if they can't be. That's not the goal. We don't like murderers. Murderers are bad. That's
Mhm.
kind of why we're having this conversation. We see a lot of murders that are happening by people with a lot of power, right?
Yes.
um, so I guess we can capstone on that. Do you know much about the police reform or police abolition movement or anything? And what are
Yes.
your opinions on that? Since we've been kind of mean to the institutions as a whole for the video.
Kind of truthful about them, but
Truth hurts.
uh, it doesn't it, and it should because it's hurting other people. So it should hurt back a little bit, a lot of it. But anyway, to answer the question, I think because there's a lot of designed belief around what is happening in jail and who is in jail and why they're in jail, people immediately jump to like, what about super serial killers and child abuse molester people, folks? And we see by and large the folks who are incarcerated, majority of the people are on, nonviolent offenses, drug offenses, things that really could be rehabilitated. Sure, we can have that conversation about this small population of folks that we don't necessarily know what to do with, or maybe need to be kept, away from society for public safety issues or whatever. But obviously, we can't just lock them away and throw away the key.
Yeah.
But anyway, for the sake of this argument, sure. But what about the 80% of everyone else that are in these facilities that aren't helping them? They're being put into these facilities for 1 or 2 years and released out in a worse state than they were, unemployed, disconnected, da 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 da. No, justice or no personal gain or growth from them, put back in the same positions that they were in that probably led them into whatever situation that they got incarcerated for. That's actually not helping. It's expensive, it's harmful, it doesn't promote public safety, it doesn't promote anything that people say it does, but it's just a part of the system. And I always say, that powerful systems will do whatever it takes and project whatever it takes so they can remain in power. So we need to be having these conversations that maybe seem radical to some people because otherwise we're just not going to have them, right? So the more aggressive that people have these conversations, the more attention that can be happen to them, to pull out actual statistics, and the knowledge about what's happening in these facilities so something can change. But we look at really simple things like the DARE program that we've known for decades has no effect on reducing the amount that kids say no to drugs. In some cases, the opposite effect, right? You see the memes out there like, oh, the kid with the DARE T-shirt, that's the kid you can get some good weed from. Like, we know that. Everyone knows that. Like, you can just Google it and find dozens of articles on it, but we still do it because it looks good and it makes people feel good like they're doing something when they're not actually doing anything. So the conversation needs to continue.
So I'd like to mention a couple of things. One, apparently Dare, like Dare in the '90s, where it was the anti-drug thing or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they've apparently reformed and are focusing more on other things. I'm not sure exactly of the details, but they no longer have the say no to drugs because of those studies that you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so Dare is maybe better, maybe I don't know. I just know that they're no longer doing that explicit program. But the other thing,
Well, we'll see about that, because
yeah.
I've unfortunately been involved in a lot of reform type activities where they just rebrand the same thing,
Oh, is that the case?
to sort of
Okay.
keep it going.
Well, yeah,
So
and
I don't know. I haven't looked at Dare in a long time, specifically, but I would be wary until I saw some actual evidence that it's doing good.
Yeah. And I'm not saying necessarily that they are doing good. I was just informed that they had changed their goals. And
Well, it's about time. It's been like 30 years.
yeah, and I think
So,
if memory serves, what they focused on now are, I want to say, child trafficking is what their goal is to bring attention to
what
that
the
issue,
fuck?
which is a
How is
weird
it?
shift. But like, this is from memory from an interview that I had with the sales company that wanted me to fucking do promotions for them that I didn't ultimately end up working for because they wanted me to work 6 days a week, and I have way too many projects for that shit. Um, but I'm gonna look
How,
at
how, how is it even there then? Like,
I'm gonna look it up after the video, and I'll probably do like an addendum to this to correct myself. But with that said, though, I kind of mentioned this in another review that I did, the Purge review, about how poverty and crime are cyclical. Like we disenfranchise these
yes.
people, and like I don't want to seem like I'm tokenizing you, but a little bit because one, you're a fucking therapist, and that's why I wanted to have you on the goddamn show.
Right
Um,
on.
but also like people of color tend to have just lower incomes and lower net worths than
Mm-hmm. For reasons,
for
but
yeah
continue.
for so many reasons that we could go into
Mm-hmm.
redlining, slavery,
Mm-hmm.
Jim Crow, all of these things, and also
Mm-hmm.
Reaganomics, definitively Reaganomics.
We
Fuck
love
you,
that.
fuck you, Ronald Reagan. So poor people are more likely to be in prison. People of color are more likely to
Mm-hmm.
be poor. Therefore, people of color are more likely to be imprisoned. And people say it's because that's where the crime happens, but that's also not exactly true. Uh,
Mm-hmm. That's where the over policing happens, but
that's where the over policing happens because, like, with drug crimes in particular, which you cited, I'd have to look up the exact statistic, but I think that you're pretty on the mark there. I think it's something like 50 to 60% of people imprisoned are due to non-violent drug crimes.
sure.
They were caught with a joint, which I'm for legalizing all of the drugs. Fuck it, I don't give a
Mm-hmm.
fuck. It's a health issue. It's not a thing we should be punishing, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so my thought on that is just that we disenfranchise these people, especially after prison, where it's much harder to get a job, much harder to get back up on your feet, much harder to become that productive member of society, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
means. Um,
Yep.
and you're left stuck with either going back to prison, going back to a life of crime, or what we
Mm-hmm.
choose to identify as crime. Because again,
Yes.
I don't feel like someone smoking weed or whatever because their life sucks and they need some amount of relief is necessarily something
Right. And they have no access to mental health. Like, whoop, that's a big loop back to this conversation.
yeah, because and like it goes back to the whole medical institution as a whole, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
like not only do they not have mental health, which is definitively a fucking luxury for many
Mm-hmm.
people, they also don't have
Yes.
health care. They like if they're in constant pain, like I tend to be in, they don't really have a means of exploring solutions to that, so they'll
Right.
self-medicate because of course they will.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people
Of
do. People
course.
don't like being
Why
in
wouldn't
pain.
you? Mm-hmm.
Um, then there's the concept of one of the other things that happens in a lot of prisons, which you might have insight on. I've just kind of through osmosis and culture, people call prison a criminal's college. You'll go in there for something minor.
Mm-hmm.
You stole a loaf of bread or whatever. You get a little bit of time. Then you go in. You learn how to pick locks. You learn how to do other crimes, and you become a more proficient criminal because you're around these other theoretically more proficient criminals. And it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of doubles down, especially when you, again, don't have any opportunities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I have mixed thoughts about that because there's some like the structure of how that is like even when we were talking about integrating education into incarcerating places, people are like, well we don't want no smart criminals, we're just going to be smart criminals if you get them GEDs, like, so I mean there's all kinds of things like that. But we also do know, like, there's evidence that, which is why, we try to split up different categories of folks, but um, there's definitely evidence that people who are incarcerated are still needing to be social. They're still needing to navigate that situation. They still need to survive. They still need to have alliances. And so, yeah, they may get in with people who show them other things or get them involved with other things, or just by, being, related to them in similar proximity on the outside, they may get into other situations. But the thing that people don't understand, because it's really not that common knowledge, is that there's something called, like, it's almost like criminal point system, almost like you think about your credit score. And you can go in on a very small crime, you have a fifth degree substance, whatever, paraphernalia, and whatever you've got, and then you go into a county jail, but you get out on probation. If you violate your probation, you get more points, and they can go all the way up until it's a felony. So you could commit no more crimes. You could do nothing else but only that one crime, and then maybe you messed up on your probation, means which you missed some meetings, right? You went out of state. You peed dirty. Clearly, you have a substance abuse issue or whatever, and of course, you're gonna occasionally pee dirty. You pee dirty, you get more points. So there's felons out there who can't vote and can't do a lot of stuff because 15 years ago they got caught with some drug paraphernalia in a small amount of XYZ thing.
Yeah.
So it's really complicated.
Yeah.
But yes, that kind of thing does exist to some extent.
Well, and I also want to point out that back to the conversation about how we disenfranchise people, especially, again, because you're more likely to be poor if you're a person of color. Felons can't vote. Like
Right.
that's so fucked up. Like we literally, like the story that I was told as a child was the reason that we had the Revolutionary War was a taxation without representation, and we have
Mm-hmm.
this system where these people are paying taxes. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're a felon or a former felon or whatever, an ex-felon, who comes
Mm-hmm.
out and does that, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to pay taxes. It may not be a super large amount because again you're less likely to have consistent work or a good job or whatever, but that's still taxation without representation.
Right.
um, and that's it goes back to the whole how especially with the prison labor system, how
Yes.
slavery in America never necessarily went away. We rephrased it or reframed it to make it look
Mm-hmm.
better. And I didn't even think about the parole system mainly. I understood on an intellectual level, like somewhere in the back of my mind, that
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know about the point system per se, but I knew
Yep.
that you could get in further trouble if you missed meetings, which
Yep.
it's so hard, especially like you don't if you don't have a car, and poor
Yep.
people are less likely to have cars. They're
Yep.
less likely to get licenses. It's part of the whole. It's almost like there's a system, a structure of power that is affecting people's lives that we need to reform or yeah.
Almost.
I think all of that's really great, and you know me, I love my ACAB rants. um, uh, with that said, I don't want to take up your whole entire day, so I figure we'll end it here. Do you have anything that you want to promote? A TikTok, a Facebook, an art, anything like that?
I do all those things, but if you find me, you find me. If you don't, you don't. Shit.
So that's super enigmatic and super cool. I'm much less cool than Law here. I have a Patreon, I have a Facebook, I have a Twitter. Follow me on all of those things. Give me money if you want to, or don't. I don't know. I don't deserve money. Um,
Yes, you do. Come on.
um, check out my books if you'd like. I have a superhero novel which is tangentially related to this because Halle Berry played Storm and Catwoman. There's the connection.
There you go. Yes.
Read that. I have a ghost novel, a novel, a romantic comedy about ghosts, All of that'll be in the description. Read that, do the thing, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share this with your friends and family. I usually do a weird call to action where I tell people to hack into something or something. La, do you have a joke that you want to? How do you want people to share this video? You're the star here.
So, what you'll need to do is you get possessed by a ghost who was murdered and have them send you into the criminal justice system. And then when you're there, you figure out a way to get out of your cell. Then you log into the computer system and then use all of them to like and subscribe and share the videos that are made by Wide Media. That's what I think should happen.
There we go. There we go. So, as always, just get possessed by a ghost. That's the easiest solution that we have.
Exactly. Yeah, I have a lot of very strong and period. I don't know what that was, but yes.